So let's say someone hands your organization $100 million tomorrow and says, use this to end homelessness in your city. Sounds pretty amazing, right? Until you realize that creating big, sustainable social change is just a bit more complicated than merely hitting your fundraising goals. There are a lot of questions you'd still need to figure out, and some of them don't have easy or clear-cut answers. So, can more money end more social problems? And if so, how should we be approaching our fundraising efforts differently if our goal really is to move the needle on the big stuff like homelessness, hunger, and more? Let's explore what it takes to create large-scale social impact and how fundraising plays an important role in this third episode of our Changemaker Cafe Fundraising 101 series. You can download our series action guide for resources and tips on fundraising at changemakercafe.com. And of course, thank you to Click and Pledge for sponsoring this series. Ready? Let's get curious. Warning, watching Changemaker Cafe may lead to side effects such as caring a lot, an insatiable desire to help others, growing your skills to change the world, or becoming a leader in your community. For best results, use an open mind and share with all your friends. Feels like another century now, but do you remember a few years ago when Elon Musk said he'd give $6 billion if the UN World Food Program could prove how it would solve global hunger? Well, regardless of how you feel about old Elon, the news story did spark an important dialogue across sectors about what it actually requires to create lasting social change. And the United Nations did respond with a detailed plan that would save 42 million people in 43 different countries from starvation, an objectively amazing goal. But the plan would not completely end hunger. That, it turns out, would take a bit more money and some other things. Let's rewind a bit. Okay, so you see, in 2015, world leaders gathered and committed to several noble goals, including ending world hunger by 2030. They better get on that. The plan was that global leaders would invest funding each year to tackle hunger in numerous countries. But despite these goals and global commitments, according to recent reports, the world is moving backwards on its goal of ending hunger by 2030, not forward. So what is going on, and what does fundraising have to do with it? Well, according to UN reports, many factors are at play in the worsening hunger crisis, including the war in Ukraine and climate change. But reports also point out that greater financial investments can turn things around as long as they're spent in strategic ways. For example, investing more in changing the food systems that, they say, are perpetuating inequality. Let me ask you this. If you were in charge of ending global hunger, would you invest more funding into making sure communities facing extreme hunger received food assistance every day? Or would you focus more on investigating the barriers to stopping hunger at the root? Or would you try to do both? The global hunger problem helps illustrate the tension that we feel as changemakers between two approaches to social impact work. So you've got charity, and then you've got systemic change. We discussed this in a historical context in our first video of our Fundraising 101 series, but let's just recap really quick. So charity is when we address needs day to day, like when someone is hungry and so you give them food. But if we only ever focus on meeting needs day to day, when will we figure out what's causing so many needs to exist in the first place so that we can try to end the needs altogether? That is where systemic change comes in. A systemic change approach to social impact means that we are investigating the root causes by asking questions like, why are so many people hungry or homeless in the first place? What about our systems is perpetuating this problem, and how should we change those systems to fix it? Kelly Griffin, nonprofit strategist and author of Solve, Not Serve, What Other Nonprofit Management Books Won't Tell You, talks us through these two social impact approaches.
You see someone suffering in front of you, you want to do something. Most of us. want to do something, right? Want to do something to help. And so a lot of times I've seen, and again, I work on strategy, so I help people kind of lift their heads up from this ideally, but a lot of times people get stuck into the, how do we feed more people? How do we serve more people? Instead of thinking, how can we solve this problem so fewer people are suffering? But when it comes to solving the problem, right? When it comes to curing a disease or ending homelessness, we need to think differently. It isn't about putting all the people in various shelters. It might be about how do we, for example, how do we use all this currently unused commercial real estate as housing, right? What is that? Changing some codes? Like, okay, great, let's do it. I don't know what that costs, but let's do it. That's solving the problem.
So when it comes to fundraising, what do we do here? It starts with helping donors and funders understand what it really costs to create the big impacts that they want to see. According to Oxfam, a global organization with a mission of fighting inequality, it would take an estimated $37 billion each year to reach the goal of ending hunger by 2030. So it's a little bit more than Elon Musk offered. This shows us that more money does play a massive, important role in moving the needle on major social problems. Unfortunately, charitable giving has remained stagnant at about 2% of the gross domestic product in the United States for decades, and corporate and government grants and giving fluctuate as well. So in some cases, we're just not hitting the level of funding required to tackle some of the social problems that we want to tackle. There are a number of possible reasons for this, but one of them might be that the reality of what it truly costs to address major social problems is just not understood by most people. And honestly, who could blame them? This stuff is legitimately hard. In the beginning of this video, we talked about a magical scenario in which you were handed $100 million to end homelessness in your city. But how do we know that that amount of money would actually be enough to do the job? Researchers who study problems like these have some decent guesses for some of these issues. But the challenge comes in when we have to consider some other complexities like the preferences of different stakeholder groups or existing laws and policies that could impact how we tackle any given social issue. For example, you might say that with $100 million, you could just go out and build a ton of houses and then put people in them, right? Homelessness solved. Well, not exactly. Even if building housing is a major component to the plan, you'd also have to figure out where to build to accommodate zoning laws in your city, coordinate with dozens of agencies serving the unhoused, determine what other services people need to stay out of homelessness, address any political or community objections to the plan, figure out how you're going to track your progress so you actually know when you finally ended homelessness, create systems and infrastructure to prevent future people from becoming homeless, and a lot of other stuff that we can't fit in this video. So as you can see, political barriers and conflicting stakeholder interests, existing systems and structures, and a need to address other connected issues like employment and mental health in this example, make problems like homelessness a little more complicated and expensive to solve. But helping people understand these costs and complexities can actually go a long way to mobilizing a bigger response from funders and donors. So for our Changemaker Challenge today, I'm curious, what do you think about this? As changemakers, how can we raise awareness about the costs of tackling these major social issues? Share your thoughts in the comments. Now, as we've mentioned, getting enough money to truly tackle the problems is important, and so is having the ability to invest that money in the most important things. But what are those things, and what is preventing us from investing in them? In a recent study, Harvard Business Review analyzed what it took to move the needle on 15 world-changing social movements, from youth hunger in the United States all the way to eradicating polio. And they found that a handful of key investments were critical to making these huge impacts happen. First, these successful social movements didn't just address needs day to day. That's the charity part we were talking about. They also invested resources in efforts to change policies at local, federal, and global levels after they learned which policies were contributing to the problems. Second, they invested in forming partnerships and collaborations across all three sectors: nonprofits, businesses, and government. And third, they invested significant funding in their organization's capacity, including things like marketing campaigns to drive awareness, organization infrastructure like technology and strong administrative systems, and research, training, and salaries for skilled staff. Wait a minute, you might be thinking, that sounds like they put a lot of funding into an organization's overhead, not program expenses. I thought that was bad. Well, it turns out that investing more in critical elements of overhead, like infrastructure, marketing, and staff skills and capacity, can actually lead to more and bigger impacts. If that seems confusing or backwards to you, I found that this is a helpful way to look at it. Let's say you have to lift something heavy. It helps to have muscle. And to build muscle, you need to invest in your body by spending time training it and putting in the right foods. So social impact efforts are kind of like weightlifting. If we want to achieve something big or lift something heavy, to go with the analogy, we have to feed our bodies or organizations to do it. Just like human bodies, organizations can't run very long if they're starving, right?
People say, oh, I'm only going to give to a nonprofit if 100% of my donation goes to feeding these hungry kids. And that's a fallacy. There are actual humans that are doing the work of feeding those kids, right? There has to be some overhead allocation, right? So if you're giving $10, 8 of your dollars might go to the kid, but 2 of the dollars is going to keep the lights on, right? To pay the salary of the employees who are, collecting the food, delivering the food, what have you. And so we call that the overhead myth.
Harvard Business Review's analysis of successful social movements challenges a common misconception about nonprofit overhead, that it's wasteful or inherently bad. This misconception about overhead, also called the overhead myth, as Kelly shared, has been among the barriers preventing organizations from raising enough money to move the needle on big issues for decades. But as fundraisers, we can help people better understand that properly funding things like infrastructure, marketing, and staff capacity can actually lead to bigger and better outcomes. Here's an example. A recent study of the nonprofit Habitat for Humanity found that the Habitat chapters who invested more in their overhead and infrastructure actually built a greater number of houses for low-income community members than the chapters who invested less. One key to raising enough money to cover your infrastructure and capacity needs is to focus on what's called unrestricted funding. If organizations only ever receive restricted funding, meaning funding that has to be used only for very specific, usually programmatic expenses, then it may never have the freedom to invest in things like growth or innovation or other capacity building needs.
So I think that a key to nonprofit fundraising is who your funders are and what your relationship is with them. You'll hear a lot about unrestricted funding, and I think that is critically important. A certain percentage of any nonprofit's funds needs to be unrestricted. Unrestricted meaning it isn't tied to any particular program or any particular budget line item, right? It's like, here's money. We trust you, nonprofit organization, to do what you need to do with it, right? To use it in an appropriate way to solve the problem that you're trying to solve.
So how can we convince funders and donors to provide that unrestricted support instead? One way is to get really good at explaining your efforts long game. We just can't assume that everyone around us can clearly see the path to solving these big, complex social issues. Like I said, this stuff is legitimately hard. But as fundraisers and as change makers in general, one of our most important roles is to communicate the steps on our journey to get to that end goal. There are several things we can do to accomplish this and build trust with donors and funders so that they will provide that unrestricted support that we can invest in the strategies that will really move the needle. For one, share what your social impact work looks like behind the scenes. You want to bring people along on the journey by showcasing what your operations are like, the struggles you face, the trials, the tribulations, and the triumphs. This helps potential donors really get it. Two, you want to paint a picture of what your organization's path looks like between where you are now and that ultimate end goal. Want to end homelessness, hunger, or other problems in your community? What's your strategy? What are the steps along the way? Talk about the vision openly. People love to fund a concrete plan that makes the impossible feel possible. And three, when talking about your impacts, don't just include short-term outputs like we fed 1,000 families or we housed 50 people. Also include long-term transformations like we helped 90% of families escape the cycle of food insecurity completely. That shows sustainable change. This is the perfect segue to thank our series sponsor, Click and Pledge. Click and Pledge is a robust fundraising platform that really scales with your organization as you're trying to grow those impacts. Their robust fundraising features include everything from donation forms to in-person fundraising features at events, text to give, peer-to-peer fundraising that allows supporters to form teams and raise money in their networks, video fundraising with donation links embedded directly in your videos, donor outreach tools to improve donor retention, a complete Salesforce integration, and many other integrations, and a lot more that I just don't have time to tell you about today. Some platforms charge you more based on your organization's size, but one thing that's great about Click and Pledge is their pricing is going to stay the same even as your donor list increases. There are no contracts, and all of their solutions are included at no extra cost. You can learn more about Click and Pledge's fundraising solutions and get your first month free using the links below this video. Get in contact with their team, ask any questions you have, or schedule a demo, or sign up to give it a try right now. In the next video in our Fundraising 101 series, we'll dive deep into our own hearts and minds as we seek to understand, why are we so afraid of fundraising? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss it. And of course, all the other videos that we have going on in this series. I'll see you for the next episode of Changemaker Cafe.